Hey there, y'all. Today I'm reviewing thrash speed metal band Deliverance's 2021 album Camelot in Smithereens Redux, which, as the title suggests, is a redo of their 1995 album Camelot in Smithereens. This is actually a review I've talked about doing as far back as 2 years ago when I first started revamping my YouTube channel, and then, well, life happened. So now is finally the time, better late than never. So let's dig into Jimmy P. Brown II's creative masterpiece, Deliverance's Camelot in Smithereens Redux from 2021. My review is on the other side. Hey there, y'all, and welcome. Tim Risto here, host of the Creative Christians Podcast, joining you once again for another episode of Tim Talks Christian Rock. It is so good to see you. Thanks for joining me here today on the show. Before we get started, I have to give a quick shout out and thank you to my subscriber, George. George has been a great source of encouragement and motivation along the way in getting this review done. Since I first talked about doing this 2 years ago, it's been kind of a long journey. George has often messaged me and said, "Have you done that Camelot Redux review yet?" So I couldn't have done this without your encouragement and motivation along the way, George. Thank you so much for that. It's subscribers like you that keep me going because I know you're interested, I know you're watching, I know you're engaged because you take an interest in what I'm doing here. So thank you so much for that, George. So for the purposes of this review, I'm going to be referencing this super deluxe bundle edition of Camelot and Smithereens Redux, which was released by Retroactive Records and is available through boonsoverstock.com. That edition comes with 2 vinyls, the original and the Redux edition, both on black vinyl, both remastered. Very nice editions. Also includes the Deluxe CD edition, which is kind of this tri or quad fold out edition, which includes the remastered CD of Redux, the original 95 CD, but remastered, of course, a DVD of making of content, and one of the most important things, which we'll talk about later, is the 32-page booklet, which includes the story. We'll get into all that. You also get a cassette copy, which is kind of fun, of Redux, and a jewel case CD, which comes with, not the booklet, but it does come with a small little fold-out of lyrics and a art or photo card along with it. So it's a very nice bundle, very nice edition. According to boonsoverstock.com, they produced 500 copies of these bundles, and as of the time of the recording of this video, they're still available for $125 per bundle plus shipping, of course. So, of course, you can get the CD, the vinyl, and the cassette separately if you just want to buy individual elements, and obviously those will be less than the whole bundle as a whole. But check out boonsoverstock.com for all that great merchandise. This isn't an ad for them, but I would like to promote them because this is a very nice bundle, and they do produce some great stuff. Okay, I'm going to start with a very brief look at the band Deliverance itself, then how the Camelot album came to be, both the original and the Redux, before moving into a look at the style of music of this album. From there, we'll look at the story, some of the potential meaning of it, before moving into a track-by-track of the Redux album. I'm going to move pretty quickly, so we're going to cover stuff pretty fast to try and keep things moving along, so here we go. The band Deliverance has embodied many different musical styles over their career: thrash, speed metal, industrial metal, progressive metal, white metal, alternative, hard rock, and others. The band, or really Jimmy P. Brown II, who is the founder, main writer, and primary member of Deliverance across all of their albums since the beginning, and truly the genius behind it all, has taken Deliverance on a journey through a variety of musical genres. Camelot and Smithereens Redux, completed in 2021, is technically their latest album. Deliverance's previous effort, The Subversive Kind, was released in 2018. However, Camelot Redux is a remake of their 1995 album of the same name, so really, this is just a redo of that 7th album. Jonathan Swank of Heaven's Metal explained the lead-up to this album quite well. He wrote, I probably won't be the first Deliverance fan to confess that when Camelot and Smithereens was originally released on Intense Records in 1995, that I was a bit confused and less than enthusiastic. With the 3 releases prior to Camelot, Jimmy P. Brown II and company had covered a wide array of styles, catapulting Deliverance out of the narrow niche of thrash metal into a wider, more progressive musical world. Stay of Execution 1992 was a powerful and effective transition album, one revered by fans as heavy-hitting, yet freshly progressive. Learn, 1993, on the other hand, slowed things down a bit, the focus on lurching heavy grooves and pounding rhythms, haunting melodies, and some of the most poignant, beautifully crafted Deliverance lyrics to date from Jimmy. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, came River Disturbance with its more alternative and polished approach. Why the synopsis of these releases? Because it appeared that with the release of Camelot in 1995, Jimmy was trying to take the next step in the progression of Deliverance, combine all the elements that had made the last 3 records great into a massive concept metal piece with detailed storyline to boot. Only problem? The label wasn't biting on the idea. Add a rushed production and the fact that most fans didn't really understand what Camelot was supposed to be about, and the end result, not surprisingly, was a somewhat disjointed collection of songs without a printed storyline to follow. Regardless, Camelot and Smithereens 1995 was a grower of an album, one that after many listens had enough brilliance in its parts to be appreciated in time by the Deliverance faithful and the wider progressive metal audience in general. Not surprisingly, as he explains in detail in the DVD documentary included with the Deluxe Book Edition, Jimmy was never satisfied with the original release on multiple levels. Hence, fast forward some mere 26 years, recalling the lyrics to time, and we stand witness to the revitalization redux of Camelot and Smithereens. Only this Camelot 2021 version represents, in essence, a true birth and not just a reworking or remastering of its predecessor. Redux is a realization of what Jimmy originally envisioned for Camelot, complete with a full story, song interlude tracks, and a radically different and improved sound. This truly is a new album, and it's really very well done. It just stands heads and tails above the original version. And this is not to knock the original version, but clearly the issues that Jimmy had and that the band had in getting that done the way they wanted it to be done are much more fully corrected here in this version. On Camelot, Jimmy P. Brown II was really exploring and embracing his David Bowie side, vocally and musically. So naturally, the album has some strong David Bowie influences and styles present on it. There's even a David Bowie song on it as well. Track 10, The Beauty and the Beast, is Deliverance's cover of David Bowie's classic song. Is it sacrilege if I like Deliverance's version of the song better? I mean, David Bowie is great, don't get me wrong, but I really do like Jimmy P. Brown II's version of the song on here. There's just something about it. It's got a feel and a flow and a lightness to it that I really, really like. Thematically, it works really well on the album, too, in relation to the character of Lindsay's story, which we'll talk about in a bit, too. Jimmy's vocals are often very Bowie-like for many of the songs, which is something he'd begun to explore already back on the Learn and River Disturbance albums in 1993 and 1994, respectively. Camelot also has some nice Pink Floyd influences on it. It is in some ways perhaps the closest we're going to get to a kind of Christian Pink Floyd The Wall concept type of album. Not that this is like The Wall, but just that it's like that kind of a concept type album. You may disagree, but that's kind of what it feels like to me. Maybe the Trumpet Call rock opera, written by Russian rocker Valery Baranov and performed by the Dave Markey Band back in 1985, 10 years before Camelot was first produced, was a similar kind of conceptual effort, though that was much different and not nearly as fleshed out in terms of a story concept as Redux has finally become. Pink Floyd homages appear throughout the album, which I love because I'm a big fan of Pink Floyd. Yeah, they're not Christian, but Their music is pretty amazing and iconic in so many ways. Jimmy P. Brown II leans into that on this album. The album opens with someone scanning through radio stations, in and out of static and white noise, until it settles on the opening line. This is very reminiscent of Floyd's opening to Wish You Were Here, the song from the 1975 album of the same name. This is followed by other sound effects, like a helicopter, crowds, and the like, all similar sound effects used by Floyd on great effect on The Wall. But it's also noticeable in dramatic tracks like track 3, Enter, where you can hear synthesized elements reminiscent of On the Run from Floyd's iconic Dark Side of the Moon album, reflecting our protagonist Lindsay's life on the run, as well as Liam, her lover, running out on her. Also, track 7, Anymore, starts with a heartbeat sound effect reminiscent of Dark Side, and then leads into a dark guitar that not so subtly reminds me musically of Empty Spaces from The Wall. It even has similar themes dealing with sexual promiscuity. Not Too Good For Me is a kind of Young Lust-themed rocker, although the similarity ends there as they are different musically and thematically. Much like The Wall or other concept albums, there is a musical main theme that runs through the album. Here it's the song Somber Theme that recurs a few times throughout the album, though often very subtly. Overall, this album has a darker vibe to it, both musically and thematically. Similar to how Sacred Warrior's Wicked Generation has a darker feel to it because of the subject matter of that album, so too does Camelot, much like Pink Floyd's The Wall. These are not upbeat albums, generally speaking, but at least Sacred Warrior and Deliverance give satisfying solutions to the problems raised by pointing the way to Christ. Which brings us to the story itself. What's the album about? What is the story about? That's been the question on everyone's mind since the album first dropped in '95 and confused everyone. Let me tell you, the storybook that's included with the deluxe edition of the CD is muy importante. I mean, you cannot really get through listening to the CD and understanding, peeling back some of the layers of meaning without this booklet. It certainly helps with understanding the story a great deal. It sheds a ton of light on that, but it does also help a great deal with understanding the meaning, some of the deeper meaning behind the album. So I don't really think you can enjoy the album as well without at least having read this once. It's very good. This is a very good story. It's written by Jimmy P. Brown II and Rick Mester. I believe Rick Mester really developed this entire storybook with the assistance of Jimmy P. Brown, or with the structure of the story from Jimmy P. Brown. So he really did an excellent job on this story. It's well done, but it gives a great deal of clarity and insight to the album itself. It's just a shame to me that they didn't produce a larger version of this booklet for the vinyl edition of this, because I think that would be wonderful. In fact, I kind of wish, as I've gone through this, that they'd done something like, for those of you that might be familiar with Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds musical version adaptation of War of the Worlds that came out probably in the 70s or early 80s. It's a great album. It's this dramatic storytelling of War of the Worlds done with music and voice actors. It's a great album, and there was a booklet that came with that, which I think is exactly the kind of style that could be used for this particular album. If they put that kind of booklet with some great illustrations in between the text, that'd just be a huge winner. Would love to see something like that, but don't think that'll happen. But it's just a shame they couldn't do something more with the vinyl edition. So as it is, the only way to get this story booklet again is by buying the Deluxe CD edition, fold-out version I showed you earlier. So definitely pick that up because it's very, very helpful. To really get into this, let's start with the title, Camelot and Smithereens. Camelot, of course, is a reference to the fictional castle and court of the 12th century King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table. Camelot has long since been the reference for Hollywood, politics, and culture, particularly here in America, as the romanticized myth of a society where good always wins. In the 1960s, the presidency of JFK was often portrayed as a kind of Camelot, symbolizing power, wealth, attraction, and charisma. Those themes are present in this story. The album cover art on Redux is really cool. I like it a lot, especially the style of art, which is almost kind of graphic novel style, which I think is something near and dear to Jimmy P. Brown's heart. I love, the red rose and the breaking glass, all of which is imagery pertinent to the themes and the story on the album. But when I first saw this album cover and didn't have the storybook and listened to the album, I kind of came away with a different impression of what some of these scenes, how they tied in to the story. And so it was a little deceptive at first as to what it was about. But the scenes do tie in well to the story, but again, without the booklet, you may kind of get a different impression. Some of the imagery shown here are not big story points. They represent things in and of the story. Many of them underscore the Camelot theme of the title, but are not in the story itself. That's not a complaint, by the way. Album art can be very symbolic and subjective. I'm just pointing out that for an album that confused everyone on its initial release in terms of the story, you would hope a Redux clarifies the story, which thankfully this one does. But it also leaves much room for interpretation, which is a good thing, in my humble opinion. I do like this summary that Doug Peterson of Down the Line zine wrote. Paralleling the mythical Camelot, this story locates itself in a community that sadly allowed falsities and scheming to fragment the lives of those serving it. The narrative is centered in a lady named Lindsay, who is given a new start in life and is embraced by a thriving church. She gives her heart to a man groomed to be a powerful leader. After discovering she is pregnant with his baby before tying the knot, she becomes entrenched in hypocrisy and has to leave community she has embraced. In the end, Lindsay finds redemption and hope, but not without a cost. The story is riveting and beautifully told. That's a pretty good description, and I like it a lot, but there are some things I think that are a little more open to interpretation than even what he states there. But it does provide a nice framework for, generally what this story is about. The story is interesting and has these layers of meaning to it. Jimmy P. Brown II is really a genius writer in that he has some very introspective lyrical writing. He explores the journey of humanity and faith through emotional drama and spiritual depth. I like how he makes this comment on the DVD. We all go through the human condition, just in different ways. There are a lot of allegorical elements to the Camelot and Smithereens story. Jimmy P. Brown II even says that it can mean whatever you bring to it. He says that's his writing style. So just keep that in mind as you listen to it, because there's a lot that will still be unclear even by the time you get to the end. The glass asylum, for example, is that real? Is it strictly symbolic? Is this story an allegory for the birth of Christ? There's some similarities, but then there's other big differences. Does the story take place in a futuristic version of America, or is it an alternate reality of some sort? I'm not sure about all these things, and that's okay. This gives the listener a lot to wrestle with and adds depth to the story and layers of meaning to the album itself. I really appreciate that because some of the best writers today write with this broader context in mind, as opposed to more of the message-driven or agenda-driven writing that we're seeing today in a lot of films, TV, and music. Jimmy has also said something in his interview on the making of DVD in this set that caught my attention. He said, Camelot and Smithereens was the beginning of my writing style towards that tapping in to the emotional placement of the believer. Seeking God, struggles along the way with temptation, addiction, fear, and sin, taking responsibility for our actions, paying the price for our sins, the value of caring for one another, as Christ set the example, and of course, redemption, are all elements explored within this story. The opening line, with one word, we can literally affect the whole universe, and the question that is posed, challenging the listener to contemplate, what is your word, sets things into motion. That question and the themes that accompany it linger long after listening to the album. It's challenging to consider, and for believers and non-believers alike, it offers much to contemplate. Honestly, this album has challenged me to consider things in my own Christian faith walk. That an album can do that is, in no small measure, a masterful success in its own right. Once more, back to Heaven's Metal and Jonathan Swank's great article there. Other than his faithful longtime compadre on bass, Manny Morales, the contributing musicians this time around represent a mixture of old and new faces. Nuncio Tucci, guitars, and Phil Barrero, drums, have replaced Marcus Colin and Jeff Mason from the 95 sessions. Additionally, George Ochoa, Mike Phillips, Glenn Rogers, and Larry Farkas each contribute guitar solos. Add the 5 voice actors, and Redux has blossomed into a totally different musical production with epic magnitude, one which certainly eclipses the original in terms of sound quality, cohesion, and clarity. Agreed. Great group of musicians and an awesome sounding musical experience. Redux is just richer sounding and more robust than its 95 original.
Tell me, what is your word?
So there you have it, my review of Deliverance's Camelot and Smithereens Redux. There's one thing I can say for sure, having listened to this a lot more in preparation for this review and over the past several months, I really, really like this album a lot, and it continues to grow on me more and more. It's just got a lot more heart than the original. More heart, more richness, more sonic and musical clarity, not to mention clarity of the story itself, especially when you have the booklet with the Deluxe CD. So I'm really, really enjoying this album a great deal. It is, for what it's worth, and as a Pink Floyd fan myself, our Christian The Wall. Does it topple Learn as my favorite Deliverance album? Not quite yet, but the more I listen, it's coming very close. Is Camelot and Smithereens Redux Jimmy P. Brown II's masterpiece? Maybe. The verdict is still out on that one because his solo album Eraserhead is incredibly good too, and very underrated. I guess time will tell. So, what's your word? According to Wikipedia, depending upon how reliable you find them to be, Deliverance supposedly has another album coming out here this year in 2024 called 12. I've heard nothing else about that, so I guess we'll see. What do y'all think about Camelot and Smithereens Redux by Deliverance from 2021? Love to hear your thoughts on it. Leave your comments below and let me know. Otherwise, that's it for me today. Go out and listen to some great Christian rock, and above all else, stay in God's Word. Blessings, y'all.